Have you ever felt like you want love so badly, but the moment it gets close, something inside you quietly starts pulling away? Have you ever noticed that you miss people when they are gone, but when they come back, you suddenly feel distant, uncomfortable, or even trapped? If yes, then there is something deeper happening inside your emotional world than you might realize. Most people think love problems are simple. They believe it is just about finding the right person or fixing communication. But psychology tells a different story. Sometimes, the real struggle is not outside of you, it is inside you, in the way your mind has learned to protect you from emotional pain. There is a pattern in human behavior called attachment style. It is not just theory, it is something that quietly shapes how you love, how you trust, and how you react when someone gets close to you. And among all attachment styles, there is one that creates the most confusion, one that feels like a constant emotional war inside the same heart. You want connection, but you fear it. You crave closeness, but you doubt it. You miss people, but when they come near, you feel like escaping. This contradiction is not random. It is not you being too complicated or too sensitive. It is a deep emotional survival pattern that was formed long before you even understood what love meant. Think about this carefully. Why do some people feel calm in love, while others feel anxious even when everything seems fine? Why does safety sometimes feel uncomfortable for certain people? Why does emotional closeness feel like both comfort and danger at the same time? The answer lies in something your mind learned over time. When emotional experiences in the past were unpredictable, when love came with confusion, or when care was mixed with fear, your brain adapted. It created a system to protect you, a system that says, don't trust too easily, but don't be alone either. And now, that system still runs quietly in your adult life. This is where the fearful avoidant attachment pattern begins to show itself. It is one of the most complex emotional patterns because it carries two opposite forces at the same time. One part of you deeply desires love, connection, and emotional safety. But another part of you sees closeness as a potential threat. So you end up stuck in between, not fully close, not fully away, just emotionally exhausted. And here is the most important truth most people never realize. This pattern is not about the other people in your life. It is not about them being wrong for you or you being wrong for them. It is about how your nervous system responds to emotional intimacy. It is about fear stored in memory, not logic in the present moment. That is why even when someone treats you well, your mind still searches for hidden danger. That is why even when love is available, you hesitate to fully receive it. Because somewhere inside, closeness and pain got connected in the past, and now your system tries to prevent history from repeating itself. But here is what makes this even more powerful to understand. This pattern does not just affect romantic relationships. It affects how you see yourself, how you trust others, and how safe you feel in everyday emotional connections. It can make you feel misunderstood even when you are surrounded by people. It can make you feel alone even in relationships. And most importantly, it can make you question your own emotions constantly. You might not even realize it, but you could be living inside emotional contradictions every single day. Wanting someone to stay, but feeling the urge to push them away when they do. Wanting to be understood, but hiding your true feelings. Wanting stability, but feeling uneasy when life becomes too calm. These internal conflicts are exhausting, and over time, they can make love feel confusing instead of comforting. But there is something very important to understand before going deeper into this. Awareness changes everything. Because the moment you start recognizing these patterns, you stop being controlled by them unconsciously. You begin to see that your reactions are not random. They are learned responses, and anything learned can also be understood, healed, and changed. As this journey continues, You will start to recognize specific signs that reveal whether this fearful avoidant pattern might be present in your emotional life. Signs that may explain why relationships have felt unstable, confusing, or emotionally intense in ways you could never fully describe. And by the end of this, something powerful will become clear. Not only will you understand your emotional patterns better, but you will also begin to see that what once felt like emotional chaos actually has a pattern. And when there is a pattern, there is always a way forward. So stay with this, because what comes next might quietly explain parts of your emotional life that you have been trying to understand for a long time. What if your relationships never feel peaceful, but instead feel like a quiet battlefield inside your mind? What if every time someone gets close to you, a strange tension starts building inside you, even when nothing is wrong on the surface? This is where the real struggle begins for many people who carry this emotional pattern. On the outside, everything may look normal. Conversations happen, laughter happens, even affection may exist. But inside, there is a constant sense of alertness, as if the heart is always trying to decide whether to stay open or shut down. It feels like two opposite forces are active at the same time. One part of you moves toward connection, warmth, and emotional closeness, but another part quietly prepares for disappointment, rejection, or loss. And this creates a strange inner pressure that is hard to explain to anyone else. Psychologically, this happens because the brain is not only reacting to the present moment, it is also reacting to stored emotional memories. When someone has experienced inconsistency in emotional bonds before, the mind learns to stay alert even during calm situations. It starts scanning for signs of change, even when there is no real danger. So when someone gets closer, instead of feeling fully safe, the nervous system may respond with discomfort. Not because closeness is bad, but because closeness was once linked with uncertainty, and the body remembers what the mind tries to forget. This is why relationships can feel like a constant internal struggle. One moment you feel connected and open. The next moment, a small change in tone, timing, or behavior can create doubt. Suddenly, your mind starts analyzing everything. You begin to read between lines that may not even exist. And the confusing part is that this reaction does not stay consistent. It comes and goes. That is why it feels unpredictable. There are moments when you deeply miss someone and want them close, but when they respond with the same energy, something inside you tightens and creates distance. This push and pull can happen so fast that even you struggle to understand your own reactions. Over time, this creates a cycle. You move toward people, then pull away. You want connection, then fear it. You crave emotional safety, but when you experience it, it feels unfamiliar. And anything unfamiliar to the emotional system often feels uncomfortable at first, even if it is actually safe. This internal conflict can also lead to overthinking small things. A delayed message may feel heavier than it really is. A short reply may feel like emotional withdrawal. Silence may feel like rejection, not because it truly means that, but because the mind has learned to prepare for the worst outcome early, just to avoid emotional shock later. At the same time, there can be moments where you test people without realizing it, not through words, but through distance. You may step back slightly just to see if they follow. You may become quieter just to observe their reaction. This is not manipulation. It is an unconscious search for reassurance in a way that feels safer than directly asking for it. But the problem is, these patterns often create more confusion instead of clarity, because the other person may not understand what is happening internally. They only see mixed signals on the outside. And this can slowly create emotional distance on both sides, which then confirms the fear that was present in the first place. This is where the battle becomes exhausting, because you are not only trying to manage a relationship with another person, you are also trying to manage a relationship with your own reactions, and that second battle is often the harder one, The mind keeps switching between wanting closeness and needing space, between trusting and doubting, between opening up and shutting down. This constant switching drains emotional energy. It can make even simple relationships feel heavy over time. And what makes it even more difficult is that this pattern does not feel like a choice. It feels automatic, like something inside you reacts before you even have time to think. That is why many people feel frustrated with themselves. They cannot understand why they behave differently than what they truly want. But underneath all of this, there is a deeper truth. These reactions are not random. They are learned emotional responses shaped by past experiences. The brain created these patterns to protect you from emotional pain. Even if they now create confusion, their original purpose was safety. The challenge is that what once protected you can later become a barrier to closeness. So relationships start to feel unpredictable. Not because love itself is unstable, but because the internal system interpreting love is in a constant state of alert. And this is why understanding this pattern matters so much, because once you begin to see the cycle clearly, you are no longer fully controlled by it. You start noticing the moments when your mind is reacting from fear instead of reality. And that awareness slowly creates space between you and the automatic response. This is where real change begins. Not by forcing emotions to disappear, but by recognizing how they operate. Because once the pattern is visible, it can no longer quietly run your relationships in the background without being noticed. And as this understanding deepens, the next step is to identify the specific signs that reveal when this emotional pattern is active in your life. Signs that are often subtle, but powerful enough to explain why love has felt both deeply desired and strangely complicated at the same time. Have you ever wondered why your emotions feel like they don't follow a straight line, but instead shift without warning, even when nothing outside has changed? Why does comfort sometimes feel unsettling, and distance sometimes feel strangely peaceful for a moment, even if you don't actually want it? To understand this deeper, you need to look beyond surface-level emotions and step into something the mind rarely explains clearly on its own. There is a psychological system inside every human being that quietly shapes how emotional bonds are formed. It is called the attachment system, and it works like an internal guidance structure for connection, trust, and emotional safety. When this system develops in a balanced way, relationships feel steady. People can stay close without fear, express emotions without hesitation, and trust without constant doubt. But when early emotional experiences are inconsistent or unpredictable, this system does not disappear. Instead, it adapts in a more complex way. It starts learning mixed signals about closeness. At times, emotional connection may have felt safe. At other times, it may have felt confusing or overwhelming. And the mind does not ignore this pattern. It stores it as emotional information for future situations. Over time, this creates a deeply layered response pattern. It is not just about liking or disliking closeness. It becomes a deeper internal response where emotional bonding itself carries both comfort and tension at the same time. This is where a specific attachment style begins to form, known as fearful avoidant attachment. It is not about personality weakness or emotional flaw. It is about a protective system that learned to stay cautious even during moments of connection. What makes this pattern unique is that it does not move in one direction. It holds two opposite emotional instructions inside the same person. One instruction moves toward emotional bonding, seeking warmth, understanding, and shared connection. The other instruction activates protection, telling the mind to stay alert and not rely too deeply on others. These two systems operate at the same time, which creates internal inconsistency. The emotional mind wants connection, while the protective mind prepares for emotional disappointment. And because both systems are active, emotional responses can feel unpredictable even to the person experiencing them. From a psychological point of view, this is linked to how the brain processes emotional memory. The limbic system, which is responsible for emotional responses, does not always separate past experiences from present reality. So if earlier emotional bonds carried uncertainty, the brain may respond to current relationships as if similar uncertainty could happen again, even when there is no real evidence for it. This is why emotional safety can sometimes feel unfamiliar instead of comforting. The system is not used to consistency, so stability may feel unusual at first. And anything unfamiliar can trigger hesitation, even if it is actually healthy. In this attachment pattern, emotional closeness does not feel simple. It carries emotional weight that is difficult to explain. There may be moments of deep connection where everything feels meaningful and alive, but shortly after, the mind may start questioning what that closeness means, whether it will last, or whether it is safe to fully depend on it. This internal uncertainty is not a conscious decision. It happens automatically. The emotional system is constantly scanning for emotional risk, while also desiring emotional connection. That is why relationships can feel emotionally intense without being fully stable. Another important part of this pattern is emotional regulation difficulty. When feelings become strong, especially in close relationships, the nervous system may struggle to stay balanced. Instead of remaining calm, it may shift into protective responses such as emotional withdrawal, overanalysis, or sudden detachment from feelings. This is not because the person does not care. It is because the system is trying to regain control. When emotional intensity rises, the mind attempts to reduce it by creating distance. That distance is not rejection. It is regulation. At the same time, when distance becomes too much, another internal response activates. The system begins to seek connection again, not because confusion is intentional, but because both emotional needs still exist. The need for closeness and the need for safety do not cancel each other out. They coexist, creating emotional complexity. This is why relationships under this attachment pattern often feel inconsistent from the inside. One day, emotional closeness feels desired and deeply meaningful. Another moment, the same closeness may feel overwhelming or uncertain. The external situation may remain unchanged, but the internal interpretation shifts. Understanding this is important because it removes the idea that emotional reactions are random or meaningless. They are structured responses built over time. The mind is not reacting without reason. It is reacting based on learned emotional patterns that were designed for protection. And even though these patterns can create confusion in adult relationships, their original purpose was survival. The system was trying to avoid emotional pain by staying cautious. But what once helped manage emotional uncertainty can later create difficulty in experiencing stable connection. This is why awareness becomes powerful. Because once you begin to recognize this internal system, you start seeing that emotional reactions are not fixed identity traits. They are adaptive responses. And adaptive responses can be understood, adjusted, and softened over time. As this understanding grows, the focus naturally shifts from confusion to recognition. You begin to notice when the emotional system is reacting from protection rather than present reality. And this awareness creates space between feeling and reaction. That space is where change begins to form, because instead of automatically following emotional signals, there is now the ability to observe them. And as this foundation becomes clearer, the next step is to look at the real-life signs that show how this attachment pattern quietly appears in daily emotional behavior, often without being noticed at first. Have you ever felt like you are searching for emotional safety in relationships, but at the same time, feeling unsure about staying in it when it actually appears? Why does something you once wanted deeply start to feel uncomfortable the moment it becomes real and available? This is where the pattern becomes visible in everyday life. Not in big dramatic moments, but in small emotional reactions that repeat quietly over time. These reactions often feel confusing because they do not match what a person consciously wants. On the surface, There may be a desire for connection, stability, and understanding, but underneath, another set of responses begins to influence behavior in subtle ways. One of the first signs appears in emotional response timing. There may be strong interest in someone at the beginning. Thoughts feel engaging, attention feels natural, and emotional energy flows easily. But as soon as the bond becomes more consistent, something shifts internally. The same connection that once felt exciting can start to feel heavy or uncertain without any clear external reason. Another common pattern is emotional hesitation during stability. When things are calm and predictable, instead of feeling relaxed, the mind may begin to question the situation. It may search for hidden meanings or possible changes that have not actually happened. Stability, instead of being comforting, starts to feel unfamiliar. An unfamiliar emotional space often triggers internal alertness. There is also a strong tendency toward emotional withdrawal after moments of closeness. After sharing something meaningful or experiencing connection, there can be a sudden internal shift. The desire to step back becomes stronger, not because the moment was unwanted, but because emotional intensity creates internal pressure that feels difficult to hold for long periods. This withdrawal is not always physical distance. Sometimes it is emotional silence. The person may still be present, but the emotional openness reduces. Communication may continue, but deeper emotional sharing becomes limited. It is as if the internal system is trying to create breathing space after intensity. Another sign appears in the form of inconsistent emotional availability. There can be moments of strong openness, where feelings are expressed clearly and connection feels natural. But those moments may be followed by periods where expressing emotions feels uncomfortable or unnecessary. This shift is not planned. It happens as a response to internal emotional balance changes. A key pattern also appears in interpretation of small signals. Minor changes in communication or behavior from others may feel larger than they are. A short message, a delayed response, or a change in tone can create internal questioning. The mind begins to fill gaps with assumptions, often leaning toward emotional caution instead of reassurance. This is closely connected to internal expectation of emotional loss. Even during good moments, there can be a quiet background thought that things might not last. This expectation is not always visible on the surface, but it influences how emotional closeness is experienced. It creates a layer of distance even in present connection. Another important sign is difficulty in maintaining emotional consistency within relationships. There may be a pattern of moving between engagement and detachment. One phase feels connected and invested. Another phase feels disconnected and observant. This cycle can repeat without clear intention, creating emotional unpredictability in relationships. Along with this, there can be hesitation in depending on others. Even when support is available, there may be an internal resistance to fully accepting it. Self-reliance becomes a strong internal rule, not because help is unwanted, but because depending on others may feel emotionally risky or unfamiliar. There is also a pattern of emotional self-protection through observation rather than participation. Instead of fully entering emotional experiences, part of the mind may stay in observation mode. It monitors behavior, reactions, and outcomes instead of fully engaging in the present moment. This creates emotional distance even during interaction. In some cases, there is also an internal push to create space when emotional closeness becomes too strong. This space is not always physical separation. It can appear as reduced communication, emotional silence, or sudden shift in attention. It is a way for the system to reduce emotional intensity when it feels overwhelming. Another subtle sign is difficulty identifying emotional needs clearly. Because internal signals are mixed, it can be hard to understand what is actually needed in relationships. At times, closeness feels necessary. At other times, independence feels more important. This can create confusion in decision-making around emotional connections. There is also a pattern of delayed emotional processing. Feelings may not be fully understood in the moment they occur. Instead, they may become clear later when distance is created. This delay can make emotional experiences feel fragmented, as understanding comes after the experience rather than during it. All these signs are not separate problems. They are different expressions of the same underlying emotional system trying to balance two needs at once: the need for connection and the need for protection. Because both needs exist together, emotional responses can appear inconsistent from the outside, but are actually structured from the inside. Recognizing these signs is important because it changes the way emotional behavior is understood. Instead of seeing reactions as random or confusing, they begin to appear as patterns shaped by past emotional learning. This shift in understanding reduces self-judgment and increases clarity. When these patterns are seen clearly, something important begins to change internally. There is more space between emotional reaction and actual response. Instead of immediately following every emotional shift, there is now awareness of why it is happening. And as this awareness grows, the focus naturally moves toward understanding the deeper cause behind these patterns, not just what they look like, but where they come from, and how they continue to influence emotional life in subtle ways that often go unnoticed. When you start noticing these emotional patterns, a deeper question naturally begins to appear in your mind. Why does this happen in the first place? Why would someone's emotional system develop in a way that creates both desire for closeness and fear of it at the same time? To understand this, it is important to move beyond current reactions and look at how emotional learning takes place in human development. The mind does not form attachment patterns randomly. It builds them through repeated emotional experiences, especially during moments when connection, comfort, or support was needed the most. In early emotional environments, consistency plays a powerful role. When care, attention, and emotional availability are steady, the mind learns that closeness is predictable and safe. But when emotional experiences shift between warmth and distance, the internal system receives mixed signals. It cannot form one clear conclusion about what relationships will feel like.